Ay, be, di ako pwede digdi, dapat naka-ano ako, be. Ay, oh, and ladies and gentlemen, so we are live. We are live at Facebook, and we are also streaming here at the Zoom. So welcome to the online technology dissemination and training series season 2, and we are here to listen to the study entitled Climate Vulnerability Scenario of the Agri-Fishery Communities in the Bicol River Basin, Philippines. And we are very honored to have with us our speaker, Mr. Rick Ryan H. Regalado. So before we start our program, let us pause for a while for the invocation, and this will be followed by the singing of our Philippine national anthem.
Good morning, Lord. Today's a new day. A chance for a new start. Yesterday is gone. And with it, any regrets, mistakes, or failures I may have experienced. It's a good day to be glad and give thanks. And I do, Lord. Thank you for today. A new opportunity to love, give, and be all that you want me to be. Today I want to start the day with you on my mind and in my heart. As I dress, let me wear the armor you've provided daily. The helmet of salvation, the breastplate of righteousness, the shield of faith, the belt of truth, the shoes of peace, and the sword of the Spirit. With prayer on my tongue, praise for you, and petitions for those around me and those I meet. Feed me today with your daily bread, as the bread of life. Your food, like manna, will sustain me throughout any trials and hungers. Help me to set my thoughts on things above, and to speak only what will help and encourage others. Keep me from putting my foot in my mouth, and help me guard the affections of my heart today, Lord. Make whatever work I do be marked with excellence rather than perfectionism. As I seek not to make a name, but to make a difference. Help me to treat each person I encounter as you would, with respect and love, forgiving others and asking for forgiveness myself when needed. As I start this day, help me remember that I belong to you, and my desire is to act accordingly. Keep my feet from stumbling, and my mind from wandering into distractions that could steal precious time and energy from the most important things you have designed for me. I'm proud to be your child, Lord. And I'm so grateful that you died for me, rising again so that every day could be filled with the wonder of your love, the freedom of your spirit, and the joy of knowing you. I know earthly life is short and fleeting, Lord. But I want to live today as if it were the first or the last day of my life. Giving thanks for every good and perfect gift you choose to give, today, and every day. I want to live my life for you, Jesus. In your precious name, I pray. Amen.
Bayang magiliw, perlas ng silangan, nananag ng puso, sa dibdib mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, duyan ka ng magiting, sa manlulupig, di ka pasisili. Sa dagat at bundok, sa simoy at sa langit mabaga, may nilagang tulad, awit sa paglayang minamahal. Pag-islap ng matawat mo'y tagumpay na naglilindi, ang bituin at araw niya kailan pang mali magdidili. Lupa ng araw ng buwan, bakit pagsinta mo'y langit sa piling mo? Aming ligaya na pamay mga pirang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
Thank you so much. Again, I would like to acknowledge all of our participants who are viewing from Facebook Live, and also we have our participants here at the Zoom. So I am Jomerl Edward Baldo, and I am going to be your moderator for today's activity. So in response to the growing challenges brought about by the climate change, the Department of Agriculture launched the Adaptation and Mitigation Initiative in Agriculture, or AMIA, program in 2013. So AMIA is a new agriculture-specific climate change instrument that addresses both the adaptation and mitigation components of the agricultural sector in the Philippines. So the Bicol River Studies, which is also funded by the Department of Agriculture Regional Field Office 5, and the implementations of the two academic institutions, the Partido State University in Camarines Sur component and the Bicol University for the counterpart studies in the province of Albay. Today's presentation is an offshoot study of the BRB project as part of the culmination of the year's worth of work by Partido State University, the DARFO5, AMIA project in collaboration with the International Center for Tropical Agriculture. For the introduction of our resource speaker, so our resource speaker is an independent scholar under the supervision of Dr. Lauretas, working as the university's science research assistant. During his undergraduate years, he was also a recipient of various academic and honorary distinctions, including the most outstanding graduate of the Bicol University College of Science, best undergraduate thesis, and the Royal Blue degree of the Bicol University of the College of Science, or the Bicol University Order of the Blue Feather Society. Currently, he is a part of a global movement in the Climate Reality Leadership Corps. Apart from his current works on climate change and agriculture, his research interests also focus on marine research, including biotechnology, fungal microbiology, and marine natural product discovery. Friends, let us all welcome our dear speaker, Mr. Rick Ryan H. Regalado.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. First, before anything else, I would like to thank the Bicard for giving me this very unique opportunity. It's actually a great honor for me to be invited here with you today to talk about climate change and its impacts to agriculture, more specifically here in our locality. I am sure that there are many others who are older and we have more experiences and the expertise than I do. I feel I'm still very young, but what I hope to do in the next 30 minutes or so is to share our climate story and what this story has to do with our marginalized communities. I guess climate change is a topic which many of us know, but actually very few who actually acknowledge that it is there and consider that it is just as urgent as a crisis, just like the current pandemic. Um, but anyway, before I discuss my topic, allow me first to introduce myself. I am Regalado, currently a science research assistant in Partido State University. I am a biology graduate, and biodiversity conservation is actually something that is close to my heart. That is why I am currently involved right now in some climate change studies. Okay, so today, on behalf of my co-authors, allow me to present our study entitled The Climate Vulnerability Scenario of the Agri-Fishery Communities in the Bicol River Basin, Philippines. But before we delve deeper into my topic, allow me first to introduce the Bicol River Basin by the numbers. So our study area, the BRB, is generally a unique agri-watershed resource that represents about 317,000 hectares of the land area of the mainland Bicol region, 70% of which are considered agricultural lands. Okay? So it embraces three provinces, Albay, Camarines Sur, and Camarines Norte. The basin encompasses about 40 municipalities and three component cities situated either wholly or partially within the river system. And for management purposes, it is categorically divided into 8 subbasins or watersheds, namely the Libmanan Pulantuna, Ragay Hills, Iris, Nagayabo, Awili River, Waraslalo, Naporog, and Kinani. However, with the vast area covered by the river, millions of pesos in damage in agriculture and fisheries are experienced perennially by the communities living along it, largely because of climate change. Motivated by these considerations, the study operated within the following objectives. Basically, we investigated the main hotspots of vulnerability and employed a contemporary and comprehensive climate risk vulnerability assessment framework, or CRVA framework, following the latest geospatial and climate modeling approaches for the use of GIS data, or Geographic Information Systems data. Okay. Moving on, we need first to define what is vulnerability, since this is actually the meat of this topic. What is vulnerability and what actually constitutes it? Okay, so a number of studies have adopted what seems to be the most authoritative definition across the available literature. So it is the definition by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, so which defines vulnerability as the extent to which a natural or social system is susceptible to sustaining damage from climate change impacts, and is a function of the character, magnitude, and the rate of climate variation to which a system is exposed, its sensitivity, and its adaptive capacity. Okay? However, it is crucial to understand that vulnerability is not a quantifiable phenomenon. It is not something that can be measured or observed directly, but instead it is a dynamic state which is a result of various interacting variables. So what are these variables? So based on the definition that we have here, we can see that vulnerability assessment can be analyzed by looking into the exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity. Okay? None of this alone can give a reliable statement of the current level of vulnerability to a given place. But as an ensemble or as a combination, they can become a more powerful tool in understanding how well a population can cope with climate change. So how do we combine these components? How do we integrate this? Well, the next slide will explain this for you. So here we present the climate risk vulnerability assessment framework that we adapted from the International Center for Tropical Agriculture. So the figure is basically classified in gray boxes according to the three main vulnerability components, which I mentioned a while ago. It is exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity. So these are aggregated or combined to determine a final index of vulnerability of a certain place. So in our case, that is at the administrative level or the municipal level. Okay. So for you to better understand the framework, allow me to dissect it to you one by one. At this point, please bear with me since this topic will be a little bit more boring to some audiences since it will be very technical in some aspect. Okay, nevertheless, allow me to proceed. Okay, so in this framework, we divide exposure into two components. We have exposure 1 and exposure 2. But first, we will talk about exposure 1. Okay, so exposure 1 refers to the changes in temperature and precipitation between the current conditions and the future projection. We choose the decade or the year 2050 as our baseline future uh, projection. So, right? So in order to perform necessary modeling approaches for the crop distribution, we relied on 20 statistically downscaled current and future bioclimatic variables. Okay, so you can see here the blue one and the red one. So these bioclimatic variables were derived from the annual, quarterly, monthly, and even daily temperature and rainfall values for the purpose of producing variables that are biologically relevant. Okay, so what did we use for our future projections data? So in here, in order to model our future climate scenario, we used the data from the mean ensemble of 33 general circulation models or global circulation models under RCP 8.5 to generate 33 projected suitability outputs. So I will talk about the RCP 8.5 a little bit later. But what is a GCM? So a GCM is actually a mathematical representation of the Earth's climate system and its interaction. So for this, we use the data coming from various institutions from different countries, including China, Japan, the United States, France, among others. So this was given to us by our partners from the CIAT or from the International Center for Tropical Agriculture, and we integrated it into the model. So the GCMs is very relevant in this study since it was used for crop suitability assessment and able to assess the impacts of climate change to the crops. Okay, so next one, we move on to the RCP that I am talking about a while ago. So an RCP is basically a set of greenhouse gas concentration and emission pathways. And among the four, the RCP 8.5 or the high emission scenario corresponds to the pathway with the highest greenhouse gas emissions. So why did we use the RCP 8.5 in the first place rather than the other RCPs? So basically, considering historical data, okay, here, and the trajectory of on how we manage our carbon emissions for the last decade, it is empirical that using the RCP 8.5 would provide us a more realistic estimate of our future climate, since right now we are actually already following the trajectory of this pathway as opposed to other three pathways, okay, as you can see here. And by the decade 2050, it is estimated or projected that our carbon emissions will be estimated at about under 70 gigatons of carbon emission. So that's a lot. Okay, so um, that's for the future projection. Now we will talk about what climate data that was used for our current or baseline conditions. So in here we used also an example of 20 bioclimatic variables. So these are factors that are relevant in understanding the species' response to climate change. So for the first 11 variables, it is about something about temperature related, okay? And the remaining bioclimatic variables are related to rainfall or precipitation. All right, so we subsequently run it into the model to determine the degree of a crop sensitivity, So for this, we use the max-end model. So in order for us to use the max-end model, we need to have a crop occurrence points. So these crop occurrence points was identified through a participatory mapping workshop involving representatives from the academe, the LGU, and the Department of Agriculture. So the crop occurrence points were integrated along with the um, percentage output that we acquired from the results in exposure one. So crop occurrence points plus our exposure one results were integrated into the model, to the max-end model, and then the crop sensitivity index here, the green one, the crop sensitivity index was determined by using this formula that you can see. Okay, so for this exercise, again, we involved various representatives from different institutions in order to collect the data of the crop occurrences. Okay, so as aside from the rice occurrence points that was generated in this exercise, we also generated data for occurrences for corn, tilapia as our representative commodity for fisheries, cassava, and taro or natong. So these commodities were the ones that we included into the model in order to predict their suitability for the future projection. So moving on, we are finished with exposure one and sensitivity. Now we go to how we determine the exposure to, or exposure to natural hazards. So for this component, we include natural hazards and various hazardous processes which were deemed to pose a significant risk to the agricultural sector. So we identified 8 hazardous events and pressures that you can see now in the screen. All right. So next, for the adaptive capacity, we compile data sets for each of our respective capitals. So these are the capitals, the economic capital, natural capital, social capital, and etc. So there are 8, and used the values of at least 57 indicators to generate the adaptive capacity index. So you can see here in the table some of the indicators that we used. So this is only about 15, but there are actually 57 indicators. But for the purpose of showing it to you, I included this table for better interpretation. Right? So Adaptive capacity is a crucial component of the study, since among the three components of vulnerability, it is the aspect that is directly correlated with resilience. Okay, so aside from the fact that adaptive capacity forms the three pillars of vulnerability assessment, in addition to in addition to exposure and sensitivity that we already discussed a while ago, um, adaptive capacity at the same time is forms part as one of the three components when measuring resilience, in addition to the absorptive coping capacity and transformative capacity. Okay, so following the GIS processes in this framework, so these are indicated in orange. Okay, these are the GIS processes. So we finally determine the final index of vulnerability. Uh, so following the values computed by SIA. So the values computed by SIA were 15% for hazard, sensitivity, 15% also. And highest importance in defining vulnerability was um, attributed to adaptive capacity, having an almost 70% um, weight on the overall vulnerability equation. So these percentages were included in this equation here as the basis for the weightings. So weight hazards, the hazard has 15%, sensitivity 15%, and adaptive capacity again 70%. So after assimilating the weights in the overall vulnerability equation, um, we now finally have the vulnerability index of that certain um, municipality or city. So we use this equation for that purpose. Okay, so data standardization was applied across all components to normalize the values linearly from a 0 to 1 interval. Okay, so moving on, I have here a more simplified version of the framework. Okay, so this is from Palau et al. 29, the study of Palau et al. 2019. So basically, just the same, vulnerability can be quantified by aggregating the adaptive capacity index coming from the various adaptive capacity capitals. So plus the potential impact. So potential impact can be obtained by aggregating the hazard index, okay, plus the sensitivity index. So potential impact plus adaptive capacity, we have the vulnerability, climate risk vulnerability of a certain place. Okay, and now we go to the results and discussion. So the following slides, okay, summarizes the results of our indexing exercise. Okay, so for comparison, it is important that the index values that we generated per component should be interpreted as relative rather than indicative within the whole context of the analysis. Okay, so again, just a recap. Vulnerability can analyze by integrating the character, magnitude, and rate of climate variation by its exposure, sensitivity, plus adaptive capacity. So this is based on the definition again from the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change. So besides from this generated map, okay, we accompany it with a kernel density plot which summarizes the numerical indices for each component. So these kernel density plots are located below the maps. Okay, so the density plot basically says that the left side is interpreted as low to very low, okay, and the right side as high to very high, and somewhere along 0.4 to 0.6, is considered to be moderate. Okay, so overall, the BRB is characterized by high to very high exposure of only about 9%. Okay, along the regions of Calabanga, Bombon, Cabusao, and Libmani. Okay, so these are based from the available data. Okay, moving on, based on the model, it suggests a decline in suitability in about 20% of the towns in the BRB. So these are indicated in brown color, so as you can see, and adaptive capacity, which is characterized by low to very low, comprising about 58%. Oh, this is shocking. This is very high. Um, since adaptive capacity is very important in understanding resilience, adaptive capacity should be should be relatively high in order for a community to resist climate pressures and other risks brought about by climate change. So you can see that most of the towns that are along or beside cities have relatively high adaptive capacity. This is actually true since cities have more access to healthcare, more um, more infrastructures, and more services that can provide to actually cater their constituents. While most municipalities that are below the third class category has actually very low adaptive capacity. So the challenge for policy now is on how we can actually help or intervene in these municipalities in order to increase their adaptive capacity. Okay, so these are only the components. Aggregating it now or combining it all together, we are given with the vulnerability index of each municipality. The results, as you can see, suggests that there are geographical patterns of climate-related vulnerability within the BRB. Okay, as you can see, there are very low, characterized by very low vulnerability, but there are also towns that are very high, characterized by very high vulnerability. Again, the density plot shows that although the vulnerability of the BRB is somehow moderate, okay, because of this mean, which is 0.4 along the middle, however, we can see that the density plot is actually a bimodal distribution, which the highest peak, okay, the highest peak leans towards a high to very high category. Specifically, 42% of the overall vulnerability is characterized by high to very high vulnerability. 37% is of the towns in the BRB are characterized by very low to low vulnerability, and followed by 21% moderate. So as you can see, 42% of the towns included in the Bicol River Basin area are actually exposed to the varying impacts of climate change. 42 is a very high number. Okay, for you to effectively visualize this map, okay, allow me to dissect it into its individual subbasins. Okay, so here the subbasins, which are relatively characterized by high to very high vulnerability, are the ones where government has to put much focus in terms of crafting effective climate policies and providing appropriate interventions. Obviously, the Tier Sub-Basin, composed mainly of the towns of Calabanga, Bogbon, Magarao, and Canatman, is significantly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, along with other portions of Ragay Hills, including Minalabak, Milaor, Balatan, and parts of Pasacao. and Libman and Pulantuna, including composed of Del Gallego, Cabusao, and Tupi. So their relatively high vulnerability scenario is primarily because of the presence of multiple hazards due to loss in climatic suitability plus the relatively low adaptive capacity. However, on the contrary, we can see that the Kinalisa Basin only has the capacity to resist climate change. The Kinalisa Basin in the Albay area is actually um, is actually characterized by low to very low vulnerability index, along with some parts of the basin. Okay, so we can see that Naga has very low vulnerability, along with Pili and Iridicity. Okay, but there are also some parts along Pawili River that are characterized by high vulnerability, including Minalabak and Baal. Okay, you can also see here Naporog with a category of very low to moderate vulnerability index, as well as in Waraslalo, majority are characterized by very low to moderate vulnerability, although Baao was found out to have a high vulnerability index. Okay, so based from these findings, we can suggest three important observations which may need further empirical analysis. First, communities within the BRB greatly rely on agri-fishery-based enterprises for food security. Food security heavily depends on climate rather. Therefore, food productivity and changes in the climate is closely interlinked. Okay. Second, climate change has the capacity to potentially disrupt the agri-food value chains to which food security heavily depends. And finally, we can see that there are significant regional differences in vulnerability in the BRB. So therefore, climate change impacts communities disproportionately, which further exacerbates poverty across the BRB. Considering these observations, we recommend various strategies based on regional vulnerabilities to enable priority setting in adaptation interventions and policies. So, for areas characterized by high to very high vulnerability, we recommend to strengthen their adaptive capacity. How? By improving healthcare, income distribution, education, pre and post disaster responses, institutional and administrative capacity building that includes greater enforcement of regulations and norms, investment in human capital, and decreasing corruption and inefficiencies. Okay? And likewise, we also need to increase their accessibility to early warning systems and climate information services. Okay? Aside from this, we also recommend for them to upgrade their water management facilities and retrofit other existing infrastructures such as irrigations, dams, flood control infrastructures, among others, since it has been found out that saltwater intrusion and large-scale flooding continues to persist in these areas. Likewise, we also recommend to prioritize climate-resilient agricultural practices, responding to their respective CRBAs. Okay, there are many climate-resilient agricultural practices out there, but among which we recommend using climate-smart varieties, rainwater harvesting, alternate wetting and drying, as well as rice duck farming. Okay. In case of the areas characterized by moderate to very low vulnerability, well, aside from considering our recommendations from the previous, okay, we also recommend for them to practice gradual crop shifting in order to maintain the comparative advantage of the farmers. Okay, policymakers may also wish to build capacities for autonomous risk management and adaptation. to marginalized communities by providing livelihoods to strengthen public investment and support. Okay, and finally, um, we also recommend for them to have strategies to promote resilience of ecosystems, since much of our resources are heavily depends on the bounty of the Bicol River, and mostly our resources are already threatened by many anthropogenic activities such as poaching, deforestation, among others. Okay, so assessing vulnerability is very site specific. Okay, it is site specific. So we are presenting this framework for communities to have targeted approach in building their respective climate resilience. So step one, they need to understand what is happening to their community and then know their options and understand the potential gains and losses of these options. Number three, draw a plan. Okay, implement actions on mitigation and addressing impacts of climate change, and then monitor these outcomes and implement actions for decision support and investment prioritization. The main idea is that knowing the drivers of vulnerability allows for a more targeted action. So the challenge for policy now will be on how to mobilize contingency measures, initiate responsibility, and stimulate conversation amongst concerned stakeholders and policymakers in terms of investing in climate adaptation strategies and heightened risk management in the areas characterized by high vulnerability. So to conclude, our findings have large implications in how agriculture will transform in the future into a climate-smart endeavor. We find the model currently projects that majority of the towns in the north and central portions of the BRB will largely experience declining agricultural productivity if stringent adaptation and mitigation measures will not be strategized and established henceforth. Okay, so for this, it is vital that location-specific, needs-based legislation should be established, which shall help prioritize, protect, support, and incentivize the local agri-fishery sector, most importantly, our farmers and fishery folks, since they remain to be one of the country's economic backbone. So this study is financially supported by Department of Agriculture Regional Office 5. So we thank the initiatives of its former Regional Executive Director, Dr. De Los Santos, and we also would like to thank Director Tornilla and the rest of the Bicol admin team for their assistance throughout the implementation of the project. Just a parting word, I think it's time to demand more from the government to think ahead and demand accountability. So at this point, I will be happy to entertain your questions. And if you happen to have more inquiries regarding our study, you can email us at da5, the Bicol River Project, at Partido.edu.ph. Okay, so I will be welcoming questions. Please throw your questions, and I will be willing to answer them one by one. Thank you very much, and have a blessed day.
Thank you so much, Mr. Regalado, for that amazing and thought-provoking reports on the vulnerability status of the agricultural communities along the Bicol River Basin. So we are still streaming live via the Bicard's Facebook page. And moving right along, let us proceed to the open forum or the Q&A segment of this presentation. We welcome the questions from our participants. Or we can check from our FB page if there are questions. Okay. If there are questions from our participants, this is the perfect time for you to throw them at our very able speaker. If you have questions, or if you are kind of shy to raise them, you can type them at the chat box, or to our Facebook Live viewers. You can also comment your questions to the comment box or the comment section of our presentation. Okay, so before we proceed with the closing of our afternoon's presentation, the organizers are reminding all of our participants here at the Zoom or via Facebook Live to please accomplish the registration link and for the evaluation link also. So please accomplish these forms. I think this will be posted. Okay, so we have one question here, Mr. Regalado. So this is from the BUCV CJR. Okay, so the question is, with PM, vulnerability to climate change is a worldwide fact. We are more interested to specific vulnerability of the region, to specific hazards. Can you specifically determine which areas in BRB are vulnerable to flood, drought, and what adaptive capacities are being implemented by the LGUs?
I am audible. Am I audible po?
Yes po, we can hear you clear.
Okay. Yes po, sir or ma'am. We have actually generated also maps separately for the vulnerability according to flood, drought. We have also for tropical cyclones. Basically, the eight hazards that we identified have separate maps also. Pero po, since we aggregate those eight, so
yung prenesan ko pong map sa presentation is the average. Perhaps you can email us po regarding this questions so we can actually let you have or let you see the maps pertaining to this vulnerability to certain hazards. Also for sa adaptive capacity naman po, we have also maps that are the separated per capital. So we have maps for the economic capital, the human capital, institutional capital. So 8 din po yun. So we have also 8 separate maps for that. So you can actually determine which LGUs have high adaptive capacity or low adaptive capacity. Perhaps we can communicate na lang po through email so we can share with you the data po. Thank you.
Okay, I hope the inquiry was properly addressed by our speaker. Do we hear other questions from our participants? Okay, so we have a question from the Facebook page. So may I read it for you? Did you take into consideration other types of land mass, such as volcanoes, as it could also affect agricultural productivity in the province of Camarines Sur? Thank you. So this is from Miss Marjorie Toscano from Partido State University.
Okay po. Regarding po the exposure to hazards from volcanoes such as lahar and other related hazardous events, unfortunately, we did not have enough data for those. Perhaps yung model po kasi based from existing data, available data na kino-compile so we can have the results for that po. So pero this is well noted po. I hope we can still extend our findings to this specific concern po.
Okay, so thank you so much, Mr. Regalado, and thank you so much also, Ms. Toscano, for your very valid question. Okay, so do we hear other questions? Okay, again, we are acknowledging our live FB viewers who are coming from the different regions of our who are coming from the different regions, from the different provinces. I think we have participants from the Partido State University, from CNSC, from SSC, and from Bicol University. So thank you so much po for joining us this afternoon for our event. So we also have other participants. We are nationwide. So we have participants from the Lyceum of the Philippines, Davao. Hello to Mr. Kyle de la Vega, and also watching live from Norsu, Gihulngan Campus, Mr. Lorenzo Janice Estoya. Thank you so much po for joining us this afternoon, and I hope you have enjoyed the talk and you have gathered information on our status of our vulnerability here in Camarines Sur. Okay? Oh, we also have from Pangasinan State University, Mr. Romar Piapacus from Pangasinan State University, Bayambang Campus, and from the Negros Oriental State University, Gihulngan Campus also, Mr. or Miss Adlene Estorco Lozanoy, and another viewer from Mindanao, Zamboanga del Sur, Sir Jeffrey Plana Villaver. Okay, so we have in here a question from the director of BICARD, from Director Estrella. What is your next step to maximize the use of those maps?
Actually po, ma'am, we have
You are in mute.
we had the effort to we have managed to actually have a terminal report book regarding this study. Included po yan sa terminal report. I have actually with it with me here. So, pwede po ata nakikita. Ayan po. So, we plan to distribute this to institutions, other institutions, including libraries, also the LGUs, and other academic institutions in order to actually communicate our findings so that those that have the authority to implement our recommendations will be guided on how they will be effectively adopting these recommendations.
Okay, so I think that also answers the follow-up question of Director Estrella regarding the project dissemination of the findings and the implementation of the recommendations. So the project is now in its terminal stage, and they are now publishing the results of these studies. So this is actually just one of the studies under a big program from the Department of Agriculture Regional Field Office 5. So the counterpart of this project to the Albay province is being implemented by DU also. Okay.
May I add something po? Dito po pala sa terminal report, I think this will be ready to be published hopefully at the end of the month. So it will be available through printed copy, and also meron din pong online copy para po dun sa mga iba na di po mabibigyan.
Okay. So I'm sure that our participants are very excited to receive or read the contents of our terminal reports. Okay, so we also like to acknowledge viewers from the Camarines Sur Polytechnic Colleges. Hi, Sir Alvin Badong from Nabua. Hello, sir.
Hi, hello po.
And our reach continue to go so far. We have from Abuyog, Leyte. Hello, good afternoon to Sir Romel M. Robin. Hello po, sir. Thank you so much po for joining us this afternoon. Okay. So from Director Estrella, she wants to send her congratulations to our guest speaker.
Thank you po, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, so we're still waiting for other questions to be raised. by our participants? Okay, so if there is none, ladies and gentlemen, that wraps up our afternoon. I want to thank you all for making time in your busy schedule to join us for this very fruitful talk. It's been a pleasure to be the moderator for this event, and I wish you all the best. Thank you so much, and thank you so much to our guest speaker, Mr.
Thank you
Regalado.
po. Pahabol lang po, if in case may mga questions pa po na di po na send ngayon, i-send ko po dito sa chat box yung email address po namin. So, doon na lang po tayo magpatuloy ng question and answer portion if in case may mga gusto po kayong itanong. Okay po, nasend ko na po sa chat box.
Okay, so thank you so much. And
Thank you
again, we
po.
are reminding our participants to please accomplish the registration forms and then the evaluation forms, which will be posted in the FB page of Picard. Again, good afternoon. Have a great day and keep safe, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you po. White Flower, hello. Happy May the 4th.